Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely.
Today, we're looking into a topic that's, well, it's definitely sparked a lot of debate over the years.
I think that's putting it lightly.
We're talking about Aisha's age at marriage.
Right, a sensitive and complex topic for sure.
You sent over this fascinating scholarly article that, well, it challenges the traditional narrative.
You know, the one that says Aisha was 6 or 9 when she married the Prophet Muhammad.
Yeah, exactly.
And this article really digs deep, questions that timeline, you know?
So that's what we're doing today. We're diving in, taking a close look at the evidence in this article.
Trying to see if it holds up, basically.
Right. See what we can make of it all, what conclusions we can draw.
And maybe even uncover some surprising things along the way.
Oh, I think there will be surprises for sure.
Now, we're going to be looking at, well, for example, inconsistencies in the historical accounts.
Right.
And then Aisha's role in the Battle of Uhud, which is, pretty fascinating stuff.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to that part.
And even her later contributions as a scholar.
Yeah, which you wouldn't expect if
she was as young as some accounts say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's just jump right in.
Sounds good.
The article, it starts by looking at, Aisha's sister, Asma.
Right, and her age.
It mentions that Asma, who was, I think, like 10 years older.
About that, yeah.
She died in 73 AH, at 100 years old.
Wow. A long life.
So if we do the math, that means Aisha would have been born around
60 of CE.
Right. Which would put her at about 17 at the time of her marriage.
Which is obviously a very different picture.
Huge difference.
Yeah, from the traditional one.
Okay, but, I know what people are thinking. One beta point doesn't exactly rewrite history, right?
Right, of course not. We need more than that.
But here's what gets interesting. This revised timeline, it actually lines up with some other stuff.
Historical events,
It fits in like a puzzle piece.
A more, how do you say it, chronologically coherent narrative.
Exactly. Now, the article then goes on to talk about how reliable, the narrations are.
The ones about Aisha's age specifically,
Yeah.
Because the traditional view relies a lot on Hisham ibn Urwa.
Right.
And he was transmitting these accounts from Iraq.
Which is, not where Aisha lived.
Not Medina, right.
So already there's some questions.
About accuracy,
Exactly. And then to make things even more complicated, Hisham's reliability, especially for the things from his time in Iraq, has been, questioned.
By some scholars, yes.
Yeah. So it adds another layer of uncertainty.
Right, absolutely. And to add to that, there's this lack of corroboration from sources in Medina,
Like you'd think that if her age at marriage was really so young, like outside the norm, there'd be more evidence.
From her own community, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just not there.
Exactly. So that's pretty significant, I think.
It definitely gives us reason to, to question things further.
Okay, now I want to jump to something else the article brought up that I thought was, just fascinating.
Oh, which part?
The part about Aisha being engaged to Jubair ibn Mut'im before her marriage to the Prophet.
Oh, yeah. Interesting detail.
So Jubair's family, they were pretty prominent in Mecca.
Very influential, yeah.
And, an engagement like that, you wouldn't just do it lightly, right?
Yes, especially not with a family of that stature. No, it's a big deal.
So it makes you wonder, why would they agree to an engagement with a very young child?
It doesn't really make sense, does it, given what we know about back then?
No, not really.
Yeah.
So the article suggests that maybe Aisha was actually already considered, of marriageable age.
By her community, even before the marriage to the Prophet.
Right. Which, that kind of flips the whole child bride image, doesn't it?
It definitely does. And it fits with the idea that back then marriage wasn't so much about age, but more about maturity.
Yeah, like when you were ready, not some specific number.
Right. So that one detail, the engagement, it really sheds a whole different light on things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's talk about the Battle of Uhud, which the article also highlights.
Oh, yeah.
Because during the battle, Aisha she's reported to have been carrying water to the wounded soldiers.
Active participant, not just watching from the sidelines.
Right. And that's not an easy role, is it? You need strength, you need...
courage, responsibility.
Yeah, exactly. It's not something you typically associate with a very young child.
And what's even more interesting is that the historical accounts, they don't treat it like it's unusual, her being there.
Like it was just normal, like expected.
Which supports the idea that, that she was perceived as being older and more mature.
Right. So we have the timeline, the source analysis, the whole cultural context of marriage, and now this.
It's definitely making us rethink the traditional narrative, isn't it?
For sure. And there's still more to uncover. The article goes on to talk about Aisha's intellectual contributions.
Her role as a scholar later in life. Fascinating stuff.
Okay, well, I'm ready to hear more. This deep dive is getting way more nuanced than I expected.
Buckle up.
Okay, so we've been talking about how Aisha may have been older at the time of her marriage than traditionally believed. What comes next in this historical deep dive?
Well, the article dives into her life after the Battle of Uhud, and specifically her intellectual contributions. Like, you know how she became this prominent scholar and narrator of hadith,
Right.
transmitting over 2,000 of them, which is, I mean, that's huge.
Yeah, hadith being, for anyone listening who might not, the sayings and traditions of the Prophet Muhammad.
Super important in Islamic scholarship, basically.
Right, like alongside the Quran, they offer guidance, insights, and form the basis for Islamic law and practice and all that.
Exactly.
So Aisha being a key figure in preserving and transmitting this knowledge, that's amazing.
Absolutely. But it goes beyond just the quantity, right? Aisha was known for really understanding, insightful interpretations of hadith.
Okay.
She even issued fatwas, legal opinions based on Islamic principles. And these were like highly respected by other companions of the Prophet.
Wow. So she was like really engaging with the complexities of Islamic law and thought.
Big time. And think about it, this level of authority, of scholarship, I mean, that takes years, right?
Yeah, you don't just, become that overnight.
Dedicated study, reflection.
Yeah.
It seems kind of unlikely for someone married so young to have had the opportunity to even, acquire all that.
That's a good point. It's like maybe the traditional narrative focusing so much on her age, it kind of overshadowed like all her intellectual stuff.
Right. And the article, it goes even deeper into hadith studies. This idea of authenticity, how we interpret these narrations, especially about Aisha's age.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me.
So the narrations, the ones specifically about her age, they don't come directly from the Prophet, right?
They don't.
They're from later followers.
Oh, okay.
Which makes them, they're historical statements, not divinely inspired revelations like the Quran.
Ah, so they're subject to the same, potential inaccuracies as any historical account.
Exactly. And the article points out these narrations, they don't have that highest level of authenticity that you see with hadith coming straight from the Prophet.
That's a pretty important distinction.
It is, because it means we can, reinterpret things, especially with all this other evidence we're talking about.
So we're not just like blindly accepting these accounts.
No, we're looking at the bigger picture, critically examining them, with historical context.
Gotcha. So oral traditions back then, especially about things like age, they weren't always super precise.
Right. More generalized, sometimes even symbolic, rather than, like a birth certificate.
I see. So are you saying that the numbers like 6 and 9, they might not be literal years?
That's one possibility the article explores, yeah. Maybe they were like stages of maturity, or significant life milestones that her community recognized. Not her exact age in years like we think of it now.
It's kind of like how we say someone has come of age, but we don't give their birthday.
Exactly. So cultural norms, perceptions of age, they were different back then.
I never thought of it like that, but it makes sense. Now, we talk about how if Aisha was born around 605 CE, it fits better with other historical stuff. Does it say more about that?
Yeah, it emphasizes that if she lived to be 67, which most historians agree on, and with that birth year, then her marriage age would probably be somewhere between 17 and 19, which makes a lot more sense timeline-wise.
It all flows better, right? And that reminds me of another thing, this absence of criticism back then.
About Aisha's age at marriage, yeah.
The article mentions that the Prophet's opponents, they never used it against him, which, you think they would have if it was so out of the ordinary.
It's an argument from silence, but it's pretty powerful when you think about it, especially how politically charged things were.
Yeah, like a missed opportunity, if her age was really that scandalous.
Right. So this lack of criticism suggests that whatever her age was, it was considered, within the norms.
Okay, so we've got a lot of evidence pointing towards Aisha being older. And even the lack of criticism supports that.
It's starting to paint a very different picture, isn't it?
It is. This is making me rethink a lot of things about early Islamic history.
And that's what's so exciting about this kind of research, It challenges us to look beyond the accepted narratives.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm ready for the big picture wrap up.
Okay.
After examining all this evidence, what are your final thoughts on this alternative perspective of Aisha's age at marriage? So much to unpack here. After this whole deep dive into Aisha's age at marriage, what stands out to you like the most significant thing we learned?
It's tough to choose just one. But I think for me, it's that, well, this new understanding of Aisha's age, it really pushes us to rethink that traditional narrative, you know?
Yeah, sure.
It's not just about her personal story. It's about how this reevaluation might change how we see early Islamic history, the social norms back then.
It's like looking at this familiar historical landscape, but suddenly through like a totally different lens.
Exactly.
It makes you question all these assumptions we have, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, what else are we getting wrong?
That's the beauty of history, isn't it? Always challenging us, forcing us to be open to new ideas, to really look critically at the narratives, the stories we've been told.
You know, when you sent over this article, I got to be honest, I was a bit skeptical.
I get it. It's a big shift.
But then, as we talked about the timeline, the sources, and, you know, Aisha's own actions, what she accomplished.
It all starts to fit together, doesn't it?
It does. And for our listener who might be hearing this for the first time, like this whole alternative perspective, what questions do you think it raises for them?
Well, how does this change our perceptions of early Islamic history, right? Social norms.
Yeah.
It makes us rethink gender roles, marriage practices, the lives of women back then, and also how these historical narratives, how they've been, you know, shaped and reshaped over time.
Because history isn't like set in stone, right? It's always evolving. New evidence pops up, new perspectives, and we're constantly learning, changing our understanding.
This whole exploration of Aisha's age, it's a perfect example of that.
Yeah, it's not just about memorizing dates and facts. It's about critical thinking, looking at the sources, being open to new interpretations. And for our listener, we really encourage you to keep going with this. Don't stop here. Go deeper. Check out the sources yourself, see what other viewpoints are out there, and come to your own conclusions.
History is an ongoing conversation, you know? Your voice matters in that conversation.
So, if you're intrigued by what we've talked about today, keep digging. There's a ton of information out there waiting to be discovered.
You never know. Maybe you'll find even more fascinating pieces to this story. That's the thing about history. There's always more to learn.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Aisha's age at marriage. We hope you'll tune in again next time as we explore, well, another captivating part of history.